Right. Well, I make it bang on the hour, 7 o'clock, not 8 o'clock. It's all right, Manda. No one's noticed you're eating apples. It's fine. Let
Right
me
on.
let me pin myself for a moment. Not to be all. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to this season's Adventurous Ink conversation with our author Manda Scott. Um, Most of you know how it goes. I've got pages and pages and pages of questions about her remarkable book, Any Human Power. So I'm going to rattle through these. Those of you who are joining us live, you're welcome to ask your questions. Throw them into the chat. And yes, throw some greetings in. So hi Dan, hi all, indeed. Amanda and I are just going to have a bit of a chat, basically. I'm in that rare situation where Amanda's already interviewed me for her podcast, Accidental God, so I get to turn the tables now and interview her for us. So it's great to welcome her in. I think she stopped eating apples, so I'm going to bring her in. If I can add a pen, there we go. Hello, Amanda. Thank you for joining us.
I need to unmute myself. Hello. Thank you for giving me the space and the time. That's lovely. I'm going to find you on our podcast and put a link in the chat. But yes,
Don't stop. No, no chatting. Here, me and you
I'm
talking
here. I'm here.
conversation.
Yes.
Okay.
Can't find it anyway. Yes, I'm here. I can multitask. It's fine. Still can't find it. Okay, I'll find it later.
So as you can tell, Amanda and
Stop.
I have chatted a few times, so we know each other reasonably well. Before some of you will know that before we get started, all of our audience they're invited in, and so I start 10 minutes beforehand, basically to sort out all my technical issues. Occasionally to make sure that the author isn't having a snooze. That has been known to happen. I did have to fill for half an hour once while the author had a snooze. I'm sorry, my company's not that interesting. At least he hadn't actually joined by the time he went for a snooze. But I normally read from another book, and I was going to read from Amitav Ghosh's The Great Derangement, which is his non-fiction book from about 15, maybe even 20 years ago, and it's just his bafflement at why popular culture isn't grappling with the issues of the moment. And when I mentioned this to Amanda went, "Oh, you were going to use the Amitav quote? I know it off by heart." So of course, Amanda, I'm going to have to tell you the Amitav Ghosh quote.
Yeah, my Tav Ghosh quote.
No pressure.
The bit. No, it's well, I know it. I know it in paraphrase. It's probably not word perfect, but it's seared onto my awareness because of what it says. So he says, future generations, looking back, will hold politicians and bureaucrats to account for their failure to act in the Great Derangement, which is now, as they should. But more, they will hold artists and writers culpable, because it's not the job of politicians and bureaucrats to imagine different futures. That's how could you possibly write anything else once you heard that or seen that?
No, it's remarkable, isn't it? And yet, for such a long time, it seemed like no one had anything else to say. No one was contributing that to that debate, and that's definitely changed. Um, but just the very fact that you were able to bring that immediately to mind, man, it sets you in context, because you're not only an author and a novelist, you're a podcast host, aren't you? So there's just this rich vein of knowledge about sustainability and regenerative practice and potential alternate futures and indigenous wisdom and all this stuff just coursing through you, which is well, it's what we need. We need people like you. So in the best tradition, I'm feeling this already. In the best tradition of Joanna Macy and her work on the Great Turning and the Spiral that reconnects, I want to genuinely start with gratitude. So thank you, Manda. Um,
Thank you.
it's so important to have this. And then the other thing I need to do as a start point is, and you told us to do this in the book. This conversation, by the way, is going to be a whole lot of me reading out bits from the book, and then essentially saying discuss to Manda.
Heaven help us all.
Well, she spits tea everywhere.
We'll see where we get to.
So,
Yes.
so she says you need to start with a clean and clear intent. So my intent is to discuss with Manda how she views the past, present, and future, and how she shares those views with us. And while we're doing it, hopefully to unwrap a few Easter eggs. I think there's a few in there that we might gently unpeel.
Even though it's not quite that time of year.
And,
Yes.
and well, Easter eggs present. It doesn't quite work the same with Christmas. No one hides Christmas anyway. And we'll unravel a few riddles and a few myths as well as we go. So that's what we're going to do. Go for it.
I'm just genuinely, if we're actually going to do set a clean and clear intent, I have a chime, which depending on what setting you got on Zoom, you may or may not be able to hear, and it it helps me to center and ground, and it might help everybody else. Does that feel like an okay thing? It's not too freaky for people? Okay, here we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Manda. And you've brought us in beautifully there, and that I do want to understand a bit about your background and how you came to all this. But I can't, with a start like that, I can't not discuss the importance of grounding in the book. And there's so much of it, and it's all the way through, and you've just demonstrated the very importance of it, and I can just feel that gentility that took me over, and that being in this moment. So,
Okay.
how have you experienced that, and why do you view that as such an important thing to do?
Whoa. I teach shamanic practice, contemporary shamanic practice, and when the students first join the circle, before we do anything else, before we even introduce ourselves, I teach centering, grounding, and shielding. And my experience is that those of us in our culture are incredibly bad at grounding. Shamanic practice is about moving off into other realities in order to ask for help, in order to bring it back and anchor it in this reality. And people are really good at going away, and they're really bad at coming back and anchoring and grounding unless you give them practice. I mean, it's not that they are deliberately not, it's that we are never taught in our culture the importance of grounding. And so it's fundamental. I don't think it's possible to set a clean and clear intent unless you are grounded first. And I think setting clean and clear intent is the single most important thing we can do, because otherwise we're setting intents anyway. It's just that they're neither clean nor clear. That's the nature of head mind. But you want a heart mind intent, and you cannot get a heart mind. You can't settle in heart mind unless you have grounding first. But I am also aware that I just employed a lot of language that is not in the general lexicon, and it may be throwing people off or freaking them out. So you need to intercede and tell me where I lose people.
It's beautiful, and I think one of the things we'll get to talking about is how your practice as a fiction writer allows you to take people into those worlds without using those words.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we need now, and that's why I was so delighted to choose it. Any human power as our deep read at the moment, and it's why it's the second of the fiction books that we featured this year. The other one being Richard Powers' Overstory. Different intent, but a very similar way to taking us into an alternate world. Yeah,
I'm not certain the intent was that different. I think he was endeavoring to create a shared reality where the more than human world is an integral part of who we are, and we need to connect to it. And that, I would say, is also integral to any human part. But sorry, go ahead. Go with it.
don't apologize. This conversation is going to go nowhere that I expected it to, and that's the beauty of it. So do you? We've talked about Amitav Ghosh. We've talked about Richard Powers already. Who who do you look to in the in the sphere of authorship and think they've got something to say and a great way of saying?
In fiction or in all writing?
All right.
Okay, that's good because in
Poetry
fiction,
and prose as
there are
well.
some fiction authors that I really love. N.K. Emerson springs to mind, and I think she got grounding. Actually, she has an amazing description of grounding in the middle of the first book in this five seasons trilogy. It's not called five. It's called five something. I can't remember. But there are very, very few fiction writers, partly because it's incredibly hard to walk us through from a recognizable future towards a place that would work, and much easier to do a jump cut and take us onto another planet or another way of being or another time frame or go the dystopic route because that's staring obvious and is unfolding in front of us. But in terms of non-fiction writing, my goodness, there are so many. So I put a couple in the chat before probably half the people came on. I've just finished reading Pedagogies of Collapse by Ginny Servant Miklos, and it completely blew my mind, and it's brilliant. She's an educator, so it's pedagogy is her thing. But first of all, she outlines how close we are to the edge of collapse really well, and then her and Jem Bendel, I read them kind of interchangeably. I was reading his blogs, and then somebody on LinkedIn said you need to read this book, and you can download the PDF for free on the website, which is useful. That we need total systemic change. That's a given. If we're going to get through with the continuation of complex life on Earth, which I would quite like us to, we need total systemic change. The majority are still being fed narratives of business as usual. Everything that you see on the television these days, if it's not a tiny bit of dystopia or somebody nice doing look at the pretty whales, oops, there's some plastic. It's all I don't know, The Diplomats or Black Doves. It's here, come into this amazingly opulent embassy or hotel, and a few people will be firing guns at each other because that's what we do as human beings, and the rest will be bathed in opulence. And this is something to aim for. And it's gone. That world is dying around us. And Ginny points out that when she is teaching students this, so they're coming from maybe economics majors or business majors or other things, and they come into her class and she presents them with what's actually going on, and some of them can't speak for several weeks. The emotional shock is extraordinary. And Jem said that he'd been at some conference where they'd invited him to speak, so they knew what he was going to say. He only says one thing now. He's only got one story, and one of the organizers bounced up to him at the end of it and went, "Hey, I've just had somebody say they were so angry they wanted to shoot you, but instead they just switched off." This is an audience that came to listen to Jem Bendel, and they were still having really deep emotional chaos. Fight, flight, freeze. And so, what he and Ginny said is, you've got to create an emotionally literate space for people to come to terms with where we are and to begin to find a sense of agency that isn't, let's just recycle a bit better, or all drive electric cars, or whatever, or eat less meat, whatever is your thing that's going to fix the world. The realization that it's not remotely enough hits hard, and we have to hold the emotional space for that to change. So they really touched me. And then I'm in the middle of reading The Bigger Picture by Alexander Beiner, who was one half of Rebel Wisdom for a long time. And it opens with him lying on a table in a research lab in London, and somebody is injecting industrial doses of LSD as an experiment. He said normal people, you vaporize it in a pipe, DMT, I don't know. Anyway, a psychedelic, you vaporize it in a pipe and you take a whiff and it lasts 10 minutes. And this was a line in the vein, and it's going to last 40 minutes. And we don't know what that's going to do to you, but you're going to tell us. So everybody, every single person in that experiment, the first thing that happened was as soon as they heard the syringe driver go on, their heart rate doubled. It's like, oh fuck, what have I let myself up in for? But he's really clear that the only way through now is to let go and stop trying to plan and create salience that is different to our existing salience and connect with whatever is there in a way that if we were in our old paradigm frame of mind would probably destroy us, and we need not to be destroyed. I'm only halfway through, but I think I don't use psychedelics in my shamanic practice, but I think we can get to the places that the psychedelics take us. It just different routes to the same place. And this is the first person I've read who gets it and who understands how we can get through. Because Gem is, we're all going to die. It's horrible. You know, best thing you can do is run away to Bali and have a farm, which is fine if that's what you want to do. But Alexander Biner is, okay, this is how bad it is. And here is how we are going to evolve our consciousness to become what we need to become to meet the reality of the moment. So there's loads more, but those two really helped my thinking at the moment. That and a book called The Others Within Us by Robert Falconer, who's an IFS practitioner. This is probably getting a bit too arcane. Let's not go there. That's more shamanic work. But anyway, where we're at, those two are huge.
I think we could take the entire rest of our hour
Just talking about those.
opening up some of those. You said something there about creating an emotionally literate space to engage with this, and I thought you weaved that into the book beautifully, because at one point Hale says to Lan, he says, you need to be more than a passive observer. You can only influence those things that have touched your heart. And that's what I was meaning before.
You read the book and you got it. I can't tell you how happy that makes me. Thank you. Yes.
And that's what I was meaning though when I said before that what you do is you take all those strange words, those mystical things that some people go, it's a bit woo-woo, I can't get that, I don't understand that. And then you put it into someone else's mouth and in a different situation, and all of a sudden it comes to life. And you do it beautifully with Lion's Grace as well. And we'll talk a little about letting go in a minute. But I just wanted to go back to the first thing that you said in that little answer, in that enormous answer. And it was that so few authors are capable of taking us from where we are to where we might go in the future. And that's what the book does beautifully. And that's why I wanted to feature it. And that's what you've called it Fruitopia. And that's so powerful because it needs to be credible. We need to build those bridges from where we are or from where other people are. We'll probably come back to that. But was that idea of creating a Fruitopia, was that a driving force behind why you wanted to write the book? And if not, maybe what was?
Yes. So before I go into that, it's not that people aren't capable. It's that they're choosing not to do it because it's easier to churn out another crime novel based on business as usual than it is to grapple with, sorry guys, the entire system is dying. Also, I am no longer published by Penguin Random House. I am published by September Publishing, which is very far along the other end of the scale of what publishing is. And to be honest, I much prefer the experience. But the big publishers, if you're Lee Child and you turned in a Fruitopian novel, the wheels would stop turning on the bus. And I strongly suspect they would send it back and ask for another one. I don't know, and I am hoping to set up a Fruitopia Masterclass version 2, and I would like people like Lee Child to want to come to it. But we have chickens and eggs that are in a really weird self-reinforcing niche of let's keep the narrative that things are okay. Let's not rock the boat because nobody wants to read about that. And I think, maybe it's time you gave them what they need to hear rather than what they want to read. and the emotional support to cope with it. But that's a really hard nut to crack. I've just come off the previous call to this, was talking to a couple of TV producers, and you won't be able to say that featured very strongly in the conversation. Nobody will put that on television. This is applying for a fund that wants us to, quotes, bring innovative views to the climate emergency. I'm going, it's not just about the CO2. We need total systemic change. No, you can't say that. And there's no point otherwise. Yeah, I'm really clear. I'm not giving my bandwidth to telling people that eating less meat and recycling a bit more is going to work, because it's not. And so, yeah, that's a quite fast conversation of, if that's where you think we need to go, then you can go there, but I'm not on board. So it's kind of frustrating. Anyway, so Throughtopia. I've said this on a number of other podcasts, so I'll keep it as brief as I can. I really thought I had stopped writing. I went to Schumacher. I had a shamanic event, which we can go into if people are sufficiently interested, which was an incontrovertible push to go and do a master's in regenerative economics in Devon. I guarantee you economics was not on my radar 6 months before that happened. And I went, and it was life-changing. And really, I thought I knew stuff, and then this really, I began to get to grips with the breadth and the depth of where we are, and the fact that we do actually have most of the solution set. What we lack is the narrative that A, this is possible, and B, we can do it. We still live, and I can't remember whose quote this is, but that it's easier to imagine the extinction of all life on Earth than it is to imagine the end of capitalism, which is exactly where we're at with publishers and producers and everything else. It is actually easier to imagine the dystopias, except they always have this little band of plucky humans surviving against all the odds. And my side of that conversation is, do you understand that the oceans are dying and they produce half the oxygen? And how do you think the band of plucky survivors is going to cope at 9% oxygen? And that tends to stop the conversation. And people, that's where you hit the, we didn't want to know that. Tell us more about recycling and plant-based diets. Anyway, so it's a fantasy. It's a total fantasy, but it's the fantasy that the part that gets it is comfortable with spreading. So I came back and started the podcast. I started the Accidental Gods membership, in an effort to bring about the conscious evolution that I think is necessary. And then summer solstice 2021, we were in the second round of lockdown, and I was having to teach shamanic stuff online, which up until then we didn't think we could, and we discovered that actually it works remarkably well under certain circumstances. And I was in the middle of the really big part of that, the course that I'd always said I couldn't teach online because it's too hard. And I got really explicit plain text instructions, which boiled down to go and sit in the hill for at least an hour as the sun goes down every night until further notice, in a specific frame of mind with specific other things set up that took me a while to get set up. And so I did that, because one thing I've learned doing this is that you don't argue and you don't ask why. You just, if you're told to do something, it's not really optional not to. You will end up doing it, and you will regret that you didn't do it when you were asked. Fundamentally, that's not the case when you're beginning doing this work, but after a certain point, if we tell you to do something, then you will do it. And that's part of the deal of reciprocity, of when I ask for help, you give help. So, and if I'm asking, what do you want of me? And they say, we want you to go and sit in the hill for an hour. I don't get to go, no, I don't think that's a good idea. And it was August. It was lovely. By the time I'd got everything together, it was the end of July. And by the 9th of August, I had the first scene of Any Human Power and the 3 void walks, and the understanding that I needed to write a book that walked us from where we are towards a future that we would be proud to leave behind. I had that phrase, and that it needed to be more than me. So I started writing the book and started setting up the Throughtopia Masterclass Iteration 1. And as part of that, I phoned up Rupert Reed, Professor Rupert Reed, who at that point was teaching philosophy at the UEA, and invited him to speak. And he said, oh, and I said, we haven't got a title for this yet. And he said, oh, it's Throughtopia. What you're doing is Throughtopia. I've written a paper here. And 2017 Huffington Post, he had written a concept of Throughtopia, which is not exactly mine, but it's close enough. And there's no point reinventing some wheel. So with his permission, we're using it, and I'll put it in the chat because it's... And now I gather there was a thing called, let me find it, this, put it into the chat. Um, they apparently had a meeting. I was talking to Audrey Tang for the podcast, and she'd just been to a meeting held by these people where they were talking about Throughtopia all the way through. Why was I not invited? But anyway, I wasn't, so I hope. Also, I don't really want to go to the States, it's fine. But I could at least have come on Zoom and had a conversation with people. That would have been quite exciting. For those who are interested, that's the Throughtopia Masterclass. So there we go. It arose directly from my shamanic practice. I don't really want to be writing another book. It's really hard work, and my partner is much happier. I'm apparently a much nicer person to live with when I'm not writing a book. Because otherwise it's no, I can't do that. I've got a book to write. Sorry, goodbye. See you tomorrow. But again, I'm not going to argue. If this is what I need to do, then this is what I need to do. And I was shown the cover, and I was told that I needed a publisher where 100% of the publishing house was totally behind the book, which meant it couldn't, with the best will in the world, be Penguin Random House. They've got hundreds of thousands of people around the world, and for any given book, most of them don't even know it exists. So I had to be with a smaller publisher. So that worked out pretty well too.
And in September again, I have a sense you might be featuring a few more books from September. They sent me a little pile.
Did they? Oh, yay! Good. Yeah, they're such nice people. Such nice people. And it's such a revelation to be with a publisher where my book is the book of the month, and their publicist has nothing else to do except be behind my book. Whereas, PRH, you get 2 weeks of the T-Boy's T-Boy. And that's just the way it is. This isn't a bad thing. It's just that's the nature of publishing. And big publishing. And wow, it was a whole different experience. I even got consulted on the cover. It's amazing.
So I mean, that's amazing to have those scenes come. Well, first of all, the instruction, and then the scenes come to you in such vivid detail. And I guess I'm interested in some of the plot devices that you use, like the void, and what that opens up. Because most of these conversations that I have with authors, they're with non-fiction writers, so they don't have quite such a broad and quite such a blank canvas.
Yes.
So it's fascinating to hear that you weren't really working with a blank canvas either, in that the void was presented to you in the same way that if an author has an experience while they're walking through the Alps, then
it is what it is.
It is what it is, and it's the same for you. That's remarkable.
Yeah, yes. So there are constraints, which is good. I was very grateful for the constraints because exactly, I've spent the last 20 years writing historical novels, and there are always, the Romans did invade Britain. We did lose the last battle. Much as I would like that not to be the case, and I still get emails from the States going, why did you make her lose? It wasn't me, it was the Romans. I'm really sorry. It's, then the joy and the wonder is I read Tacitus, and I read something that looks like it's being copied verbatim from a report sent back from the field to Rome, and I go, oh, commanders only write about somebody being totally heroic when they were completely wiped out. So this is really interesting. Why did this happen? Why did people do what they did? Once I'm writing contemporary and writing in the future from where I was actually writing, so I started in 21 and I was writing in 23, I could do anything. And so being given some constraints was really, really useful. And then the void is, so first of all, for those, has everybody here read it? Do they know what the first scene is?
Most of them will have had it. Some of them will.
Technically.
But don't worry about spoilers. We're in there.
But I think we can have a spoiler of the first scene because it's basically on the back cover of the book. So what I was given was a woman in her 60s lying on a bed, 15-year-old grandson at her side saying, when you come home, can we go up the hill and watch the crows go to bed? Which is what I had been doing. Also, crows figure quite high in my life. And she says, no, I'm not coming home. You know this. We talked about this. I'm dying. There is no coming home from here. And he says, he is broken. And he says, you're the only one that gets me. I don't want to be in a world with you not in it. And she realizes he's serious. And she says, I don't know what happens next, which is, she should, because she's been an anthropologist. She spent the last 40 years looking at death rites, rituals, and beliefs around the world. But still, when you get there, you realize you don't know as much as you thought. And she says, nonetheless, if you really need me and you call, I will do whatever it takes to come. I promise. And they're both pretty switched on people, and we feel the gods stop and look down and go, okay, you're held to that. And then she dies, and then the whole of the rest of the book is told from her perspective, having died and having to keep that promise. And then the void walks. The void is a place in the shamanic work that I do. It is not a place to visit. I thought I'd hand it round with, Lan is terrified of this place and she's already dead. And it went out to various people, and a friend of mine who had done one foundation shamanic course with me wrote to say, well, I thought I'd just go into the void and see what it was like. You did what? Are you completely out of your mind? No, did I not make that clear that that wasn't a clever thing to do? But because some things are looking after us, and I was going, and I met this that you'd warned us was always something to avoid, so I turned back. Good, thank you. Yes, I think we could consider that gatekeeper. So please, if anybody's reading this, please, I don't understand why it wasn't totally clear that you do not decide you're going to go and find the void. That would not be. I got lost there once, and I was so frightened I thought I was going to die of fright. And I'm quite used to quite scary things in the shamanic realities, and this was a whole order of terrifying, different. So I hope everyone's got that bit. So, but anyway, the void is a place that I know exists, and what I was given was that Lan is taken there by the crow that is her guide after she's died. And if you can ground well enough, if you can hone your intent cleanly and clearly enough, and both of these take extraordinary amounts of practice, honing intent is basically shamanic practice, then you can split the timelines and see possible futures that might arise. And so in the beginning, she sees the ways that Finn does kill himself. But the point is, if you're there and you can do that, it is possible, if you can take agency, that you may be able to create a timeline that doesn't exist yet. And therefore you can't see it. And so she's kicked back into consensus reality as a not living person in the land of the living, and see what you can do. And then I had a lot of fun reading pretty much everything that's been written about near-death experiences. And also, a number of the people who've written some of the good NDE books have collated stories of people who feel that they've had connection with someone who's recently died. Starting with, someone whose first memory, age 3, is of their grandmother standing at the foot of their bed and then discovering that she was already dead, up to the one that I borrowed for the book, which was, I think, a surgeon whose closest friend was another medic, and they used to play, this must have been back in the 80s, they used to play one of these really early computer games where you're kind of trying to move your little block and hit a ball and score a goal. If you scored a goal, it went, wee, wee. And they had great fun at playing this game. And he got a phone call one evening to say that his friend had died. He'd been trying to rescue the kid in the sea, and he'd drowned. And he was broken. And in his broken state, he did what felt appropriate, which was to go and play the game as a way of reconnecting with his friend. But he's playing the solo version. And he said all night it was going, wee, wee, wee. And this was not possible within the logistics of the game and how it was coded. And he felt that this was his friend connecting with him. And so I knew that was possible. And also the thing that I picked up from reading a lot of this is we have seems a kind of grace period where we have much more agency just after we crossed the line than at any time after that, to connect with people and say, I'm okay. There was a fantastic story of a woman who, pouring rain, 3 kids under the age of 10, and she's trying to get them to do a jigsaw, and they're just basically doing a wall of death around the room, bouncing off all the walls, and the dinner's burning in the kitchen, and she's going crazy, and her dad turns up and says, you want me to help with the kids? And she says, oh, thanks, and goes and gets him a cup of coffee, and he sits down, and they all come and they play, and they do the jigsaw together, and then it's all done, and he says, thanks for the coffee, and goes back, and then she gets the phone call of her mother, who's been trying to contact her, and somehow hasn't got through, to say that her father died 2 hours ago. And the whole family experienced the doing of the jigsaw together. So there are and this takes us to one of the things that Bob Faulkner writes really well in the book that we didn't get to, which is our culture is laden with a concept that we had built up over at least 2,000 years, probably longer, of the citadel mind, of what's in my head is mine and mine alone, and I let out what I choose to let out, and nothing comes in. And it's not true. There is no other culture in the world that believes this. And the porous mind is much more of a reality. The boundaries of consensus reality are much more flexible than our culture gives credit to. And part of what I am endeavoring to do with any human power, and heaven help us if I ever get to write the sequel, is make that porosity feel more real for people.
And so there is a lot of death in the book, lots of in lots of different ways, and death of individuals, and you're prefiguring a sort of a death of civilization. But there's something that you
Thank you.
well,
You noticed.
I'm going to say you because I hear Lan as you. I want to talk about that in a minute. You say something. Lan talks about creating a contained encounter with death that every whole and healthy culture has given its young people, and the implication being that we don't do that, and that
Yeah.
we're unmoored from this most grounding existential part of our experience.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I lifted that wholesale from Francis Weller, who was taught by Patrice Malidoma-Somé, and Malidoma-Somé wrote the book Of Water and the Spirit. And if anyone's interested in any of that, it's really useful and beautiful. He was kidnapped. He's African. He was kidnapped by Jesuits very young. Bad stuff. But he escaped in his quite late teens and got right the way across Africa back to the Dogon people, and was allowed to partake of their adolescent rite of passage, even though he was technically too old. And he'd been raised from 3, I think, in a white Western citadel mind mentality. And he speaks very deeply and movingly of the experience of endeavoring to meet with the spirits in the way that you have to in these cultures, with completely the wrong mindset. It's really interesting. And he then went on, Malidoma Somé went on to bring a lot of the men's movement over to the UK in particular, and to teach around the world. Anyway, he taught Francis Weller, and Francis Weller is a trauma therapist. So Weller's got a concept that he calls initiation culture versus trauma culture. And initiation cultures, exactly as Lan says, have contained encounters with death, episodic, intermittent. And the adolescent rite of passage is one, but so is birth for the mother and the child. So is death. It's a contained encounter with something that we recognize as a rite of passage to be met with grace and courage, not something that you can either pretend isn't going to happen or postpone indefinitely. And in the contained encounter with death, particularly the adolescent one, the individual is pushed to the edges of themselves. And the containment is held by the elders and the shamans. Not all elders are shamans, not all shamans are elders. The people of the tribe and the more than human world. And at that point where death seems likely, and is likely, it is necessary to ask for help, particularly from the more than human world, and to be able to bring that help in and engage and use it. Otherwise, death happens. The contained encounter with death becomes death. There are still places where, no, let's not go there. But the survival rate of the adolescent rites of passage was not guaranteed. And so we don't have that. We don't have the container. We don't have the elders. We don't have genuine shamans. I am a shamanic practitioner. I don't pretend to be a shaman because I don't live in an initiation culture. We don't have the tribal structure of the serotonin mesh of respect and pride, reciprocal, and responsibility, and all of the things that arise when you're an integral part of a proper community. And we've cut ourselves off from the more than human world. We don't know how to ask for help. And we certainly don't know how to receive it and act on it. And so our traumas don't turn into I come home and I know who I am. I know what's mine to do, and I know how to ask for the help to do it, which is what happens in an initiation culture. And I'm celebrated for that by people that I respect. And then I do what's mine to do with all of my being to the best of my ability. And my offering to the human and the more than human community in which I live is me being what I am here to be. And I'm surrounded by others who are doing the same. And therefore I am an integral part of the web of life. Our culture just doesn't even know that exists. And so our traumas don't turn into amazing life-changing things. They just stack and stack and stack until they overflow. And we have a complete pandemic of mental health crisis because we're in a culture that doesn't give us a sense of being and belonging or meaning. And healing that, I think, I kind of understood that when I was writing the book, but I think now it's become much more urgent priority, particularly since the American election, frankly. If Harris had won, we'd all have had a big sigh of relief and things would have carried on exactly as they were before. And now we have no choice but to evolve, or they're going to drive the bus over the edge of the cliff.
Yeah, in but that's the point, though, isn't it? It is where because we're not exposed to this as a society, we have to wait till we're about to tip over the edge of a cliff. We're conditioned in everything that we do to wait until we're about to tip over the edge of a cliff before we take response. And
Yeah, we don't have to be. I mean, that's the way we've let things be. But yes, you're right. Yes, I mean, we are where we are, and that's where we are. And I'm really, really cross that that's where we are. But it is where we are. So you're right. We are, we're not even a minute to midnight. We're 5 seconds to going over the edge of the cliff. We have got to evolve now, or we go over the cliff. I think this is Elia Prigogine. Another of the many quotes lodged in my head is that when any system reaches maximal complexity, there's a bifurcation, and there are two options. And one is it falls into chaos and extinction, and the other is it emerges into a new system. And chaos and extinction is a perfectly valid option. I would just prefer that we not wipe out 95% of all life on Earth.
and they talk about small islands of coherence as being
Yes.
essential within that, and I think that's what we're doing here, is we're cultivating some of those small
Small islands of coherence. Yes. Yes.
islands. So you said we need to evolve, and that's something that I don't think anyone ever really talks about the evolution of us as a species in response to ecologically relevant stimulus and feedback.
Yeah.
And I think we've lost that, haven't we?
It exists in corners of the internet. There are people who talk about nothing else, but it's not in general conversation for sure. Partly because it's hard and it requires that, E.O. Wilson, that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and the technology of gods. And it requires us no longer to be living from our Paleolithic emotions. Another person who's really interesting to read is Bill Plotkin, Plotkin. I can't remember the name of his book, but he divides human, personal, individual growth into childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and elderhood. And there are two phases within each, one of which is personal, one of which is connected with social interactions between humans, and one of which is connected to the more than human world. And his reading of basically what Francis Weller is saying is our culture, the trauma culture, is locked in early adolescence. We don't have any actual adults or elders, very few. And has been probably, this is back to Weller, since for 10, 12,000 years. You can't have the kind of agriculture that we practice in the West, where you own a bit of land and you do to it things, or you own cattle and you breed them to a point where you can harness them to a plough without both of you dying, frankly. Because you're not taking a wild buffalo and harnessing it to a plough without multiple fractures on many sides. So that requires the separation mindset. You can't do that if you know yourself to be an integral part of the web of life. So if we are locked in early adolescence, and frankly, I think, the toddlers who have stolen control now are not even that far, and we have a system that elevates the toddlers, the dark triad of psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism, and some people add in sadism, and we let those people rise to the top. And another book that's fantastically amazing is The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wengrow. It's very big, but it's beautiful, and they point out in detail, in length and at depth, the extent to which all of the indigenous cultures around the world have social technologies to ensure that that cannot happen, that dark triad getting to the top. And we broke that. Presumably, the trauma that cut us off from the web of life was the same trauma that decided that elevating the dark triad was a fun and useful thing to do. And it isn't on any level. So how do we evolve to the point where we have generative ways of connecting with each other? And another book, Plurality, if you look up plurality.net by Audrey Tang and Glenn Vile, they are working really hard. Audrey Tang, until very recently, was the Minister for Digital Affairs in Taiwan, who took their government from 9% approval rating to 79% in 6 years, totally changed their education system, changed a whole bunch of things, and is now Ambassador at Large for Cybersecurity Governance, which is a pretty cool thing to be. And is the only person I know in the entire world who, she taught herself to code when she was 8 by drawing a QWERTY keyboard in pen and then putting up another A4 thing and writing on it in pencil. And when she hit the delete key and the keyboard she'd drawn out, she'd take a rubber and rub the thing out and write something new. And her mother saw her doing that and thought she'd better buy her a computer. So she was a hacker before she created .gov before she was actually in the actual government. She really gets technology in ways that are, I think she's up there with, at the very least, Vitalik Buterin, who is pretty much a god in the Ethereum world. And she also gets that we need new social technologies to bring people together. And she's really good at making those things happen. So we have, and I used a lot of her ideas in the book. And then I got an email going, oh, these extra ideas, were you hacking our minds? I'm going, no, I wasn't, but I was extrapolating a little bit. So that was really nice. So yeah, that.
And it feels like the book is starting to sketch out how we might go about reconstructing some of those social technologies in a different setting, because we're not starting where indigenous communities were starting.
Exactly.
That we're starting here.
Yeah.
And I wondered if in the characters you felt that you were sort of sketching some of the archetypes, the difference between Niall and Kirsten, and there's a beautiful bit where you say something about we're not going to get anywhere by channeling Niall, and as someone who associates quite strongly with Niall, I was like, yeah, okay. But it feels like you're proposing archetypes and kind of mapping things onto them, and then discussing how they interrelate. Is that an intentional approach, or is that more just?
I think it arose out of the impetus for the book. I don't think there was any way to write a route through without doing that, really, or at least I didn't know what it was. Having said that, in retrospect, 2020 hindsight is an amazing thing. I think we do need a new mythology. That our existing mythology is grounded in the old paradigm, the trauma culture paradigm, and we need to shift that. And so part of what I think the book was doing, and I didn't realize it until after I'd written it, is beginning to lay the foundations for what would a 21st century mythology that was grounded in different ways of being look like, and what are the archetypes that would take that forward. So yeah, exactly that.
And so Rich agreed with me when I commented that I always heard Lan as you, and particularly when Richie gave a lecture about weaving a new mythology, the role of language, frame, and metaphor in shaping a core narrative for a century.
Which was exactly
that's you, isn't it? Do you feel?
But then so is Niall, and so is Kirsten, and so is Leah, and so is Finn. You can't write characters that aren't you. I mean, she's the closest to me in terms of demographic. But the others are parts of me also. I mean, we talked about internal family systems therapy, which is the one that is most shamanic and partly, well, let's not go there. But what it does is give voice to internal parts that are allowed to disagree with each other. And I find it's, and what's in the way is the way. That's one of Bob Falconer's favorite concepts. So the part that's going, no, we're not doing that. That's dreadful. It's whatever is the part that holds the power in the system under those circumstances. And what happens if you engage with that and see why does it believe what it believes and what does it need to say and what will it get if it has everything that it needs. There's a lot to unpick in there. So Lan is a bit of me, but way back I wrote a book called Eagle of the 12th, because the 12th actually did lose their eagle and the 9th did. So Rosemary Sutcliffe wrote Eagle of the 9th, but the 9th didn't actually lose their eagle. The 12th definitely did, but they got it back again. And I wrote that from the perspective of a gay Greek boy then become man who'd been pulled into the legions. And he was as much me as Lan is. So part of writing is creating characters to whom you can give an authentic voice. And it either works or it doesn't.
Well, I think it clearly does. And part of Crow is you as well, obviously.
Say again?
Part of Crow is you as well. So
Yes.
you're there in the more than human as well as the human. And I know
Yes.
Abby wanted to hear a little
Yes, to more about crows.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, there's also that the link between Lan and the crow that you get to towards the end. Abby, I don't really know what you'd like me to say about crows other than that they're an extraordinary source of wisdom, but then so are the red kites and so is the hill and so is the river and so is the rocks. I find crows a very useful source of wisdom, is all I can say, really. And not everybody does. This is the nature of the practices. You ask questions of the things that give you the answers that make sense and that work. They don't necessarily always make sense. I'm sorry. No, you say that you connect with the things that give you the answers that resonate, and that when you actually apply them in actual 3D reality, seem to be making the world a better place as far as one can assess it in the moment, which is part of the challenge. Abby, does that help? Right, more questions.
While Abby's telling us, I'm interested in one of the other sources of wisdom, which is the lion and lion's grace, and it's something that you conjured, and I'm interested in where you conjured it from, but also in that idea of the need to let go. And I got that very, very strongly even before we got to actual conversations about that. But I guess that's it's almost countercultural, isn't it? We don't want things to die. We don't want to let things go. We want to birth things and build new and more things to come. And the lion's grace seems to be saying that's why you are where you are.
Yeah. And the thing we have to let go of most is that our head minds have the answer and we can predict where things are going. And I think part of the lion's grace, part of something I'm teaching within Accidental Goals membership, which is the 3 pillars of the heart mind, and they are gratitude, compassion, and joyful curiosity. And joyful curiosity says, wow, that's amazing. I wonder what happens next. And even that phrase lets our head mind release some of that sense of responsibility, because people in indigenous cultures don't think like this. There's another amazing book called Hospicing Modernity by Vanessa Andriotti, who very weirdly writes it as Vanessa Machado de Oliveira. There we go. And she's Brazilian, part indigenous. So her mother was indigenous, her father was German, and her father married her mother in order to save the indigenous person. So she embodies a lot of internal contradictions. However, and she's now the dean of a university in Canada, the name of which I can't remember. Her Indigenous grandfather says that the core trauma of colonialism is not the taking of the land and the slaughter of the people. These are both very bad and they're very traumatic, but they are epiphenomena of the core, which is the belief in separability. Not even the belief in separation, the belief that it is possible to be separate. And so if we were a whole culture, we would know ourselves. It wouldn't be a question of whether we are part of the web of life. We would be an integral part of the web of life. It would be how we lived. And in that, heart mind leads and head mind is there. So if I am fully aligned, my heart mind is there to define the direction. So I set up the hill in a particular frame of mind, which was largely heart mind, and the book arises, and really clearly the instruction was you can sit up the hill more if you want, but you don't have to. You have to write the book. And then my head mind comes into gear of that's going to be really hard. So how do I do that? And there was a lot of asking, so it was a balanced thing. But our culture, we cut ourselves off at the neck, and head mind defines everything, and head mind thinks in complicated concepts of linear, move lever A, and somewhere down the line something will move. Alex Spiner's got the brilliant concept that a grandfather clock is complicated. If it stops working and you are a clocksmith and you know exactly what to do, you go in and you tweak one tiny little cog amongst thousands and it's back to working again. And we treat our bodies like that, but they are totally not, which is why Western medicine's really good at, if you break your leg, we can basically do some carpentry and put it back together again. By the time you've got a chronic illness, we are just going to keep fucking you up until you die. Because we're not good at complex things. We think everything is cause and effect. You've got a high temperature, let me give you some antibiotics. Oh, you've got biome diet. That's a bit sad. We didn't think that was going to happen. I speak as a former vet, and one of the reasons I'm a former vet is that I didn't like the linearity of it. And so how do we get our heads away from that cause and effect? We have a problem with climate change. Tell you what, we're going to block out the sunlight by turning the sky grey so that we can carry on burning fossil fuels as much as we like and it won't get so hot. That's obviously a good idea. No, it really isn't. It's an extraordinarily bad idea because the day after that happens, you are going to discover the number of species on Earth that depend on different wavelengths of light that don't come through when it's grey, that you didn't know about before. Everything about linear thinking is wrong. And if we come into heart mind and connect to the web of life, then we are part of a hyper complex system and we are part of the emergence of that. And our head mind can then do what it's good at, which is working out how to do what our heart mind has defined. And part of growing up is getting to the place where that is a reality.
And that for us as a community geared around reconnection and recognizing and attending to the separation, that is such a powerful concept that even that we think that we can be separate. That being the root of where we are now and the way through as well is just so powerful, and that's what we're doing here. That's why we read all these books. That's why we have these conversations.
Yes, thank you.
It's about doing that, and hopefully, guys, tell me if we're doing it wrong, but it's hopefully doing it in a way that doesn't create some too big a thing to scale or too obtuse a way in. Not everyone is going to go on to be a shamanic leader, but everyone has got a role to play in this, and I think that what books like this do and we didn't, there's so much we've not talked about. We didn't even have time for your conversation. I was going to get Manda to do a little reading from
Have
one of
we
the
run out of time? Because I have
Ah,
got nothing else after this. And
we're,
Rich has asked a question, so he can answer that.
it, but it's such important stuff. So
Can I say one thing? Not everybody needs to be a shamanic leader, but I think everybody needs to find out what is theirs to do. Or
absolutely,
everybody can find that out. And it's not, often isn't what our heads tell us. Honestly, if 40 years ago somebody had said I would be doing this now, I would have laughed. And it wouldn't have been a nice laugh. Finding out what's yours to do is a moment by moment exploration. But everybody has something. I just released a meditation on accidental gods that walks us back to just before the Big Bang and then walks us back forward again through 5 mass extinctions, in which 93 to 95% of all life became extinct. I hate going extinct. That's one of my pet peeves. So our ancestors are part of the 3 to 5% that survived each of 5 mass extinctions. And then there was a paper in Nature a little while ago. They looked at DNA, and I don't know how they did it. It was very clever, and it was way beyond my capacity to get. But they reckon that 800 to 900,000 years ago, there were only 2 to the power 10 reproductively active individuals that are the progenitors of early modern humans. So that's 1,024. Every single one of us is a descendant of those people. And we are the descendants of the people who lived long enough to have children, who lived long enough to have children. And that, the odds against each one of us being here are astronomically high. And yet we are here. And if we are conscious nodes in the web of life, James Lovelock, who proposed the Gaia hypothesis, actually, I think he borrowed it. Never mind. He wrote about it. And his latest book is called The Novocene. And he proposes, I don't take all of it on board. I think I don't take all of it on board. But there is a proposition that Gaia stored as much power in terms of energy sunlight as possible and released it in the shortest possible frame of time in order to be able to create 8.5 billion conscious nodes of the web of life. If that were the case, what happens if we all take our consciousness? What happens if we all step into that? All of us. Not just the people who just nicked control in the US or anybody else. Everybody has something that is theirs to do. Our system is pretty much designed to make sure that you don't get a chance to find out what that is, which is one of the many reasons we need total systemic change quite urgently. But if you can, then do it. And I think, Tim, you probably know. I mean, you're doing what is yours to do. Very likely some of the other people on this call do as well. And then do it until you're given something else. And I think being flexible of, yes, we wanted you to write novels, but now we want you to do something else is part of being open. Hang on. And Rich said, did I know when I started writing that some of the characters would not live to the end of the book? No. But, well, I knew that I was going to write a thriller and I knew it needed to have the kind of art that a thriller has. And yes, I know it was shocking as a reader, and yeah, it was quite shocking to write, actually. So no, I didn't really know that was coming, but I knew something needed to happen to, as Tim said earlier, we stop wanting the world to carry on exactly as it is when a catastrophe has happened to us. And I would like that not to be the total extinction of life on Earth, because then we won't have any agency because we'll be dead. So how can the thing about any fiction is your physiology. If I've got it right and these people feel real to you, in your physiological terms, they are as real as me and Tim. The entirety of your neural network does not know that Lana and Finn are not real people. And so your physiology behaves as if they were. And the things that they were endeavoring to do are as real as the stuff you read in the newspaper. That's the value of fiction. Our study of the personality, no, that's true. But we can make it happen, Damien. Yes. That's fine. Damien was asked, somebody asked about IFS and shamanism. There's a group called Life Architect, and they have a 5 hour webinar with Bob Falconer, which is called Shamanism and Psychotherapy. And they are an IFS group. So Life Architect, I'll put it in the chat. I can't remember the exact,
You brought us back to that beautifully earlier, so,
what it
so,
was.
so
Oh,
thank
yeah.
you, Manda. That was brilliant. I'm I'm gonna have to bring it to an end because otherwise we're going to be here all night.
Yeah, yeah,
There'll
yeah.
be
And
no
people
end,
have got lives to lead. Yes, I
there'll
realise.
be no
Thank
end
you
to
all
this
for being there.
conversation. So I don't know how to end it.
We just say thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you for coming. I'm really grateful.
And thank you, Manda. Thank you for showing us a way through and helping us find a way to develop that consciousness, to ask those questions, to understand
Thank you.
a small fraction of what we as individuals and we as a society could become. Because
Thank
we
you.
can't be what we can't imagine, we can't, or what we
Exactly.
can't see.
Yes.
You've helped us see that, and it's beautiful. The book lands with, and you map it out, and you've got, and here's some things that we could do, and then you paint beautiful pictures of what that might look like, and I think that breathes life into it in the way that lots of the other people that you talk about, like Rob Hopkins, loads of other people are doing wonderfully because this is what we need.
Hmm. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. And the last thing I would like to say is every single thing in the book that I wrote about is happening somewhere in the world, except Ray's boat, but I coupled that together from a bunch of other things. It's completely feasible. So yes, it's these things are happening. They're possible. We just need enough people to say, guys, the current system is not fit for purpose. It's just not working. When 71 million out of 350 can effectively a silent coup in the States, that's the system is not fit. That's 1 in 5.
Again, to quote Vanessa Andreotti, she says people don't start swimming when the water's up to their ankles.
No, no, you have to wait till it's up to your waist. Yes, and so I think now is a waste. The
And
water
that's,
is at our waist, guys. We need to start swimming. Yeah.
well, on that happy note,
Look, but we're here and we're talking to each other, and it's amazing. Thank you.
we are. Guys, if you want to pop your cameras on, we'll do a goodbye because it's tradition. We used to doing this. Manda, thank you so much. It's been
Thank you.
a delight. I'm
Really
looking
lovely.
for although we don't talk about the next books, I'm really looking forward to the next book. I can't imagine it won't feature. So,
I have no idea. Yeah,
but
it's hard. Things are moving too fast. It's really hard to imagine what I could write now that would be published in 2027 that wouldn't be obsolete.
who knew that Twitter would completely rebrand itself when
Exactly.
you started
Yes.
out talking? How,
Yeah.
how how does it seem dated? Or
Yeah. Yeah.
the world just keeps on moving faster, and all we can do is slow down and try and take it in.
Yes. So I might
Amazing.
write something different next time, but thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's lovely to see
Thanks
you all.
all.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the
It's been a
time.
pleasure. See you
Great.
all after the new year.
Around.
Happy Christmas.
Yes. Next year.
Happy New Year. See you in spring. Thank you for being with us.
All right. Take care, all. Bye.